reborn to the day my father received the imperial decree to march to war. This time, I didn't volunteer myself. Play the full story in one go. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. The exciting story begins right now. By the mandate of heaven, the emperor decrees, the northern barbarians have invaded our borders, and an urgent plea for help has been received from war.This. The sound was shrill and piercing, like a long, rusty nail driven deep into my eardrums. I snapped my eyes open. The bone-chilling cold radiating from my knees and the hard texture of the blue bricks were so vivid they sent shivers down my spine. There was no blizzard raging overhead, no arrows piercing through my chest, and no wails of soldiers suffering from hunger and cold. Only the front courtyard of the Nie residence, filled with the lingering scent of sandalwood. I had actually returned to the winter of the 14th year of the Jingqiu era. It was precisely this imperial edict that unlocked the prison of mountains of corpses and seas of blood from my past life. General Nie, please accept the imperial edict. Grand Eunuch Wang, the chief eunuch, smiled broadly as he rolled up the bright yellow silk scroll and handed it to my father, the mighty General Nie Jingqiu, who was kneeling at the very front. There was a deathly silence all around. I could clearly see that my father, who was usually so imposing and prided himself on being a scholar general, now stood with his back stiff and his shoulders trembling slightly beyond his control. war.Pass, the most northern death trap in the Great Liang Empire. The fortifications were dilapidated, and transporting provisions was a struggle. The Northern D had gathered 100,000 elite troops there. Going there was tantamount to walking to one's death. Only he knew best, better than anyone else, just how much of a reckless adventurer he truly was deep down. He hesitated to reach out his hand. The smile on Eunuch Wang's face faded slightly. General Nie, the emperor is still waiting in the imperial study for this old servant to report back. Your Majesty. My father swallowed hard. Cold sweat from the corner of his forehead trickled down into his eye sockets and into his graying beard. He suddenly began coughing violently. As he coughed, he turned his head with great effort, his gaze fixed directly on me. In that gaze, there was anxiety, a hint of something, and an expectation that seemed only natural. I know that look all too well. In my past life, it was at this very critical moment that he looked at me with that same expression. Back then, my heart was filled with the glory of my military family and the bonds of kinship. Seeing his frail, faltering form, I blurted out without a moment's hesitation, "This humble maiden is willing to wear a mask to conceal her face, join the army, and serve as a vanguard." Those words saved his face and preserved the wealth and prestige of the entire Nie family, but they plunged me into 3 long years of hell. While I fought bloody battles on the front lines, he sat high in his command tent behind the lines, drinking and reveling, taking full credit for my military achievements. Finally, when our supplies ran out, he joined forces with my half-sister to cut off my means of survival. A strong, metallic taste of blood welled up in my throat. I bit down hard on the tip of my tongue, using the pain to suppress the hatred that threatened to make me draw my sword. This time, I kept my eyes quietly lowered, staring at a strand of withered grass in the crack between the blue bricks, not moving a muscle. Seeing that I was still silent, father's coughing grew even louder, as if he were about to cough up his very lungs. My half-sister Nie Jingqiu, kneeling beside me, rolled her eyes immediately welling up with tears, and began to sob in her faint, weak voice. Father is advanced in age, and his old injuries have not yet healed. The frontier is bitterly cold, how could he possibly endure such harsh conditions? Eldest sister, you've studied the military treatises left by the Grand Matriarch since childhood and often visit the training grounds. How can you bear to watch father suffer like this? Every word, every sentence, was pushing me toward a dead end. In my past life, I thought she was concerned about my biological father, but hearing her now, it's clearly a poisoned dagger. Eunuch Wang's gaze also fell on me, with a hint of curiosity. I looked up, my eyes instantly welling with tears. I bowed my head heavily against the blue-glazed bricks and cried out in grief, "My sister is right. Father served the country with loyalty and unwavering righteousness. He is truly a role model for us all." Though I am a woman and cannot take my father's place on the battlefield, I will kneel before the Buddha day and night in the capital, copying the Blood Sutra to pray for your well-being. I will never let the trivial matters of the inner quarters distract you from your resolve to repel the enemy. At that, I suddenly sat up straight, gripped my father's trembling arm tightly, and said loudly, "Father, go in peace. I swear to defend the Nie family's honor with my life and await your triumphant return." My father's body jerked violently, and his already cloudy eyes widened instantly as he stared at me in disbelief. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but my words, "I'll take your place on the battlefield," stopped him dead in his tracks. If he were to go along with this now and let me, an unmarried daughter, risk my life in his place, his reputation as the mighty general would be completely shattered into a pile of mud right before the eunuch delivering the imperial edict. Nie Jingqiu clearly hadn't expected me to say that either. Her expression froze, and she even forgot to feign tears. "What a fine daughter of a general, General Nie has certainly raised her well," Eunuch Wang said with a forced smile. His expression then turned stern as he forcefully pressed the imperial edict into her father's hand, his tone icy. "Since the eldest daughter is so sensible, General, please accept this edict and express your gratitude. Such is the power of the emperor. If you refuse, the entire Nie family will be executed today." My father's hands trembled as if he were sifting chaff. Under Eunuch Wang's menacing gaze, he finally collapsed limply to the ground, as if all the strength had been drained from his bones. "This servant accepts your majesty's decree and thanks you for your gracious favor." The golden hue of the imperial edict stung his eyes, but it made my cold blood boil once more. Eunuch Wang left with his men, thoroughly satisfied. The heavy gate swung shut once more, and all that remained in the courtyard was the rustling sound of the cold wind sweeping through the withered leaves. My father slumped to the ground, staring at the bright yellow scroll in his hand, his face ashen. Suddenly, he leaped to his feet, grabbed me by the collar, and the mask of a loving father he had always maintained shattered completely. His low voice was laced with hysterical rage. "Jingqiu, why didn't you respond just now? Don't you know that with my leg condition, I simply cannot ride a wild horse? Are you just going to stand there and watch me go to my death?" The veins on the back of his hand bulged, and his heavy breathing hit my face. I calmly looked at his face, contorted with fear. I offered no resistance, but with all my strength, I managed to convey a hint of alarm and confusion. "Please calm your anger, father. I do not understand. His Majesty's decree is for you to serve as commander and defend Solitary Moon Pass. If I had interjected just now and said I wished to accompany you, wouldn't that have given people ammunition to claim that you were afraid of battle and needed a frail woman to save face? I was afraid of tarnishing your good name, father." "Reputation?" My father laughed bitterly in his rage and shoved me away violently. "When my life is on the line, what good is reputation?" Realizing he had spoken out of turn, he came to an abrupt halt, his face alternating between pale and ashen. Nie Jingqiu hurried forward to support him, fanning him with a handkerchief while fixing me with a gaze that seemed gentle but was actually provocative. "Sister, you know full well the difficult situation father is in. Guyu Pass is a perilous place. Don't you have a copy of the fragmented martial strategy left behind by the senior matriarch? If you could join the army." "You ruah!" I snapped, cutting her off sharply, my gaze as sharp as a knife. "As a woman of the inner quarters, you dare to discuss military affairs? Do you want the Nie family to be impeached by the imperial censor?" Nie Jingqiu shrank back in fear behind her father. My father clutched the imperial edict so tightly that the knuckles on his fingers turned white, his gaze wavering between panic and calculation. He knew it was useless to pressure me any further at this point. The edict had been issued, and we were to break camp in 3 days. Suddenly, he shook off Nie Jingqiu's hand, didn't even say a word, and staggered off toward his study, his back swaying unsteadily like a stray dog. I stood there, watching coldly as his back disappeared behind the arched gate. With only 3 days left, given his cowardly nature, there was no way he would simply sit and wait for his doom. Since I had cut off his obvious escape route, he would surely set his sights elsewhere, such as the few peerless military treatises left behind by my birth mother. As night fell and the lanterns at the Nie Manor began to light up one by one, the door knocker in my courtyard was, sure enough, struck. Banksia went to answer the door, holding a lantern, but all she brought back was a calling card scented with agarwood. It is Nie Jingqiu, the heir apparent of the Earl's household. The note is written in earnest tones, expressing concern for the future of the Nie family, and states that he intends to pay a visit to our residence first thing tomorrow morning. I held the letter of introduction up to the candle flame, watching as the fire consumed every trace of that hypocritical handwriting, and a cold smile played at the corners of my lips. Nie Jingqiu, my nominal fiancé. In my previous life, I naively believed he was a principled gentleman of honor and loyalty who had risked his life on the frontier to secure a future, all to spare his future in-laws from being branded as cowardly and afraid of battle. Only later did I learn that he had long been secretly involved with Nie Jingqiu. What he had ever wanted was not me, but the glorious military achievements the Nie family could provide to help him inherit his title. Early the next morning, at the water pavilion on the estate, Nie Jingqiu, clad in a moon-white brocade robe, stood with his hands behind his back beneath the veranda, exuding an unparalleled air of noble grace. Nie Jingqiu, wearing a delicate jade-green gauze skirt, stood beside him. The two were speaking in hushed tones. Whatever they were discussing caused Nie Jingqiu's cheeks to flush crimson, and she lowered her head, as if hesitating to speak. Hearing my footsteps, the two of them quickly put some distance between themselves and me. Nie Jingqiu turned around, his face immediately taking on that look of deep concern for the country and its people, mixed with profound anguish. Jingqiu, you're here. I've heard all about the imperial edict. My uncle is advanced in age, how could he possibly go to a place as bitterly cold as Guiwa Pass? Both thunder and rain are expressions of your majesty's grace. As your subject, how could I possibly refuse? I tucked my sleeves in and sat down on the stone bench nearby, my expression calm. When Nie Jingqiu saw that I wasn't agreeing with him as I usually did, a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes, but he quickly adopted a solemn tone. That may be so, but if anything were to happen to my uncle, the Nie family would collapse, and I'm afraid our marriage would face insurmountable obstacles. I know your birth mother left behind several volumes of peerless military treatises years ago, many of which contain Chiman formations. If we could entrust these to your uncle to take to the frontier, with his reputation combined with these formations, he would surely be able to turn danger into safety. Their true colors have finally been revealed. Since they didn't dare force me onto the battlefield, they settled for the next best thing, using my mother's life's work as a bargaining chip to secure promotions and titles for themselves. Nie Jingqiu quickly stepped forward, grabbed my sleeve, and said, her eyes red-rimmed, "That's right, sister. Father sat alone in his study all night last night, even his hair has turned much grayer. As his daughters, we cannot take his place in the army, but if we're not even willing to offer this small measure of help, aren't we effectively condemning Father to death? Sister, are you really willing to disregard Father's life just to cling to a lifeless object?" That accusation of filial disobedience was leveled with such seamless ease. If I refuse, and my father is later killed in battle, I will be the sinner who drove my own father to his death. If I agree, the credit for the victory will naturally go to my father and my half-sister, who devised the plan. I pulled my sleeve free from her grip, lowered my gaze to hide the coldness in my eyes, and deliberately feigned hesitation and reluctance. It's not that I'm unwilling to give it to you, but before she passed away, Mother repeatedly warned me that the formation's killing intent is too intense and its nature unpredictable. Unless one is well-versed in military strategy, it's extremely easy to be struck by its backlash. Father may be a military genius, but the terrain at Solitary Moon Pass is treacherous, and I fear... Jingqiu, you're mistaken, Nie Jingqiu immediately interrupted me, a note of urgency in his voice. My uncle has spent half his life on the battlefield, what kind of battle formations hasn't he seen? As long as he has the formation diagram in hand, he'll surely be able to unravel its secrets. If you truly have the Nie family's best interests at heart, you shouldn't be withholding this information now. Looking at the identical greedy expressions in their eyes, I let out a soft sigh, closed my eyes, and felt as if I had finally made a momentous decision. By Banksia, go to my room and fetch the locked rosewood box from the bottom drawer of my dressing table. Before long, Banksia returned, holding the box. I unlocked it in front of them, took out a slightly yellowed parchment scroll, paused for a moment with my hand suspended in the air, and then slowly handed it to Su Jingqiu. This is the 4 symbols cloud-hanging formation left behind by my mother. This formation is infinitely versatile and designed for city defense. Once it is formed, even an enemy army of thousands or tens of thousands will find it impossible to cross the line. Su Jingqiu's eyes suddenly lit up. He snatched the blueprint from her and eagerly unfolded it. Nie Jingqiu also leaned in to take a closer look. Although neither of them could make sense of the densely packed military formations, the sight of the intricate and exquisite diagrams on the blueprint filled their faces with unbridled delight they could not hide. They naturally had no idea that while this formation was indeed a top-tier defensive array, it had one extremely fatal flaw: it had to be built alongside a flowing water source to ensure a constant supply of water to the formation's core. Yet what Guyu Pass lacked most was water. Once winter set in and the ground froze over, or if enemy forces cut off the only water source outside the city, this impregnable formation would instantly turn into a tomb that trapped its defenders to their deaths. In my past life, I discovered this flaw during a drill and set it aside. Now, it serves as the perfect death warrant for this group of people. Jingqiu, you truly are a man of great principle. I'll go to my father's study right away to get it for him. Su Jingqiu didn't even bother with a few more polite words. He gave a hasty bow and hurried off toward his father's study with the blueprints in hand. Nie Jingqiu followed close behind, her steps so light it was as if she could already picture herself having landed a good match. I picked up the cold tea from the table and took a sip, watching their backs as my gaze gradually grew cold and sharp. Go on, take this key to hell and enjoy the glory you've stolen. My father treated the maps as if they were a priceless treasure. His previous gloom and despair vanished completely. In fact, at the morning court session the very next day, he even made a bold declaration in front of the emperor, vowing that on this expedition to Solitary Moon Pass, he would ensure the Northern D bandits would never return. The emperor was greatly pleased and immediately bestowed a precious sword upon him. On the day of departure, my father rode a tall, majestic horse, looking as imposing as ever. I stood in a corner of the city wall, watching coldly as the army kicked up a cloud of dust and marched north in a mighty procession. For the next half-month, the capital remained calm and peaceful. The betrothal gifts from the Earl's mansion flowed into the Nie family's home like a river, and Su Jingqiu went out of his way to praise the mighty general's divine military strategy and second young Miss Nie's utmost sincerity and filial piety to everyone he met. I stayed quietly in my own courtyard, spending each day simply poring over military treatises, listening to all that flattery from outside without even lifting an eyelid. Until the first heavy snowfall of the 14th year of the Jianzhou era. Late that night, the wind howled fiercely. At the end of the silent, long street, the sound of rapid, piercing horse hoofs suddenly rang out, accompanied by the post rider's shrill, blood-curdling shout. That sound sliced through the capital's peaceful night sky and crashed straight through the gates of the imperial city. Urgent report, an 800 Li Express dispatch. A crushing defeat at Solitary Moon Pass. 100,000 troops are trapped in Falling Star Valley, and the whereabouts of Commander Nie Jingqiu are unknown. The piercing announcement sounded like a rusty saw, mercilessly cutting through the capital's false sense of peace in the dead of night. Before dawn the next day, the gates of the Nie residence were violently smashed open by the imperial guards. The chilling clang of clashing armor, accompanied by the piercing screams of the servants inside, instantly filled the entire courtyard. I sat at the dressing table, letting Banksia comb my hair with trembling hands. In the mirror, my expression was so calm there wasn't even a hint of emotion. In my past life, while I was gnawing on tree bark in the freezing wilderness and fighting desperately to protect my father's retreat, he, too, had once been trapped in Meteor Valley. The difference was that back then, it was because he was too cowardly to send troops. This time, it was because he thought he was being clever. With a loud clang, the gate to our courtyard was kicked open. Leading the group was Xiao Changfeng, the commander of the Imperial Guard in charge of the Imperial Prison, and the man following behind him, with his hair in disarray and his face as pale as paper, was none other than Su Jingqiu, who had bid my father a tearful farewell at the city gate just half a month ago. Minister Xiao, it's her. As soon as Su Jingxing laid eyes on me, he pointed at my nose like a mad dog and roared in a hoarse voice. It was Nie Jingqiu, that wicked woman, who deliberately presented my uncle with a fake, incomplete formation diagram, leading to the rout of our army. Nie Chongshan's defeat was by no means due to cowardice. He was betrayed by this venomous woman. What a clever ploy to shift the blame elsewhere. Once Guyu Pass falls, the Nie family's empire is bound to crumble. To protect the Earl's mansion from being implicated, Su Jingxing went so far as to investigate the matter through the night, attempting to pin the capital offense of treason, punishable by the extermination of 9 generations, entirely on me, his unmarried daughter. Xiao Changfeng's cold, piercing gaze fell upon me like the edge of a blade, and his hand was already on the hilt of his sword. I slowly stood up, brushing aside Banxia's hand that was shielding me, as a look of shock and heartbreak flashed across my eyes at just the right moment. I stared intently at Su Jingxing, my eyes slightly reddened, yet my voice was unusually clear. Prince Su, choose your words carefully. That is the authentic manuscript of the 4 symbols cloud-hanging formation that my late mother risked her life to protect. How could it possibly be a forgery? If you do not believe me, Prince Su, you are welcome to submit that formation diagram to the Ministry of War and ask the Grand Marshal himself to examine it, to see whether every stroke and line on it is a masterpiece of divine strategy or nothing but scrap metal. How dare you try to wriggle out of this? Su Jingxing snapped in a fit of rage. If it were the real thing, how could an army of 100,000 have been so easily breached by those northern barbarians and trapped to death in the valley? Because it's a water formation. I suddenly raised my voice. A single tear rolled down my cheek, my despair tinged with disbelief at the absurdity of it all. The 4 symbols cloud-hanging formation is the world's greatest defensive formation, but its core lies in endless renewal. It must rely on flowing water and use a stream as its focal point to function. I've heard that at Guyu Pass, it's the dead of winter, where even a drop of water freezes instantly, and the terrain is arid with yellow sand swirling everywhere. There's simply no source of running water. As soon as those words were spoken, Xiao Changfeng's hand on the hilt of his sword paused slightly, and a flicker of surprise crossed his otherwise cold gaze. I stared intently at Su Jingxing's face, which was gradually losing its color, and pressed him, enunciating each word clearly. Half a month ago at the water pavilion, I told you and my sister myself that this formation is unpredictable. Unless one is well versed in military strategy, it's extremely easy to fall victim to its backlash. I was afraid Father wouldn't be able to handle it. It was you who said that Father, having spent half his life on the battlefield and possessing vast experience, would surely be able to fathom its secrets, and you forcibly took the formation diagram from my hands. Could it be that Father, as the commander of an army, doesn't even understand the most basic military principle of adapting to local conditions, yet dared to forcibly set up a dead water formation at solitary Moon Pass in the parched wasteland? My challenge rang out with force, every word precisely grounded in the logic of military strategy. Xiao Changfeng had spent many years honing his skills in the military. How could he not understand the ins and outs of this? The military manuals were genuine, and the battle formations were genuine as well. What was wrong was that incompetent commander who tried to apply them blindly without even considering the terrain. Su Jingxing was completely thrown into a panic. His legs gave way, and he nearly fell to his knees. He had intended to use the fake photo of his daughter to clear Nie Chongshan of the charge of incompetence, and, in the process, exonerate himself. But my reasoning, which was both logical and supported by his presence as a witness, not only completely cleared me of any suspicion of intentional frame-up, but also firmly nailed Nie Chongshan's capital offenses of being uneducated and incompetent, talking the talk but not walking the walk, and being greedy for credit and reckless to the iron board. Your Excellency Xiao, please understand, I lowered my eyes to hide the coldness in my gaze and bowed deeply to Xiao Changfeng. Jingqiu is merely a woman of the inner quarters who has never set foot beyond the frontier. I know nothing of the bitter cold and water scarcity at Guiyue Pass. It was only because I was concerned for my father's safety that, at Prince Su's urging, I handed over my mother's keepsake. If Jingqiu harbored any treasonous intentions, how could I have handed over the genuine military treatise? I only regret that my father was so foolish. Xiao Changfeng gave me a deep look. His gaze held less contempt and a touch more scrutiny. He paid no heed to Su Jingqiu, who lay limp on the ground, and merely waved his hand coldly, imprisoned the entire clan in the imperial prison to await the emperor's judgment. Take them away! I offered no resistance and let the imperial guard step forward to shackle me. Because I knew this was only the first step. I had succeeded in making the imperial court understand that this crushing defeat was not a natural disaster, but a man-made catastrophe caused by the commander's stupidity. Yet, as a descendant of the Nie family, I remained on the list of those to be executed along with 9 generations of my clan. To survive the emperor's executioner's blade, I had to demonstrate a value 100 times greater than that of Nie Jingqiu. The imperial prison was dark and damp, and the air was thick with the smell of blood and mold. I sat upright in that cramped cell for 3 full hours, making no noise and causing no disturbance, simply running through every detail of the Battle of Guyue Pass from my past life at lightning speed in my mind, the Beatty Army's supply lines, the wind direction in Yisheng Valley, and that top-secret mountain trail hidden behind the snow-capped peaks. At midnight, a steady, rhythmic sound of footsteps could be heard outside the cell. The glow of the torch cut through the darkness, and the jailer, trembling with fear, opened the door of the cell, forged from refined iron. A tall, slender man clad in a deep black cloak stepped slowly inside. The dim light of the torch illuminated his deep-set, stern eyes and the Qilin jade pendant at his waist, a symbol of the highest imperial authority. The 7th Prince, Qi. In a past life, he had defied public opinion to promote me amidst the chaos of battle. He was the only person in the Great Liang Empire who truly understood the art of war, yet had remained in the shadows all his life because of his birth mother's humble origins. Now, he was carrying out the emperor's orders to thoroughly investigate the defeat at Guyue Pass. Miss Nie, Qi looked down at me from above, his voice as cold as an ice-tempered blade. Your father's talent for armchair strategy nearly compromised the northern border of our great Liang Empire. His Majesty is furious. At noon tomorrow, the entire Nie clan will be executed. The words you spoke before the Imperial Guard may have saved your reputation, but they will not save your head. Your Highness, you have deigned to visit this death cell late at night. Could it be merely to inform this humble maiden of the date of my death in advance? I raised my head and looked directly into his dark eyes, which seemed capable of piercing one's very soul, a confident smile curving my lips. The court is facing a shortage of capable military commanders. Once Guyue Pass falls completely, the iron cavalry of the Northern D will be able to advance unimpeded, threatening the capital itself. I doubt there's a single official in the entire court who would dare to take on this mess right now. Qiyuan's gaze turned sharp, and he narrowed his eyes menacingly. You're a man on the brink of death, you can't even protect yourself, yet you still dare to meddle in court affairs? I stood up and took a step forward, dragging my heavy shackles. The clang of metal rang out particularly sharply in the deathly silent cell. I know nothing of court politics, but I know how to break the stalemate at Meteor Valley. I stared straight at him and said, enunciating each word clearly, with 100,000 troops trapped, the Northern D must surely have set an ambush at the valley entrance. If your Highness sends reinforcements to break through from the front, it will be a dead end. But what if I were to tell your Highness that, beneath Black Wind Cliff on the northern side of Meteor Valley, there is a narrow, winding path covered in ice and snow? With just 2,000 light cavalry, we could strike straight into the heart of the Northern D's supply lines. Qiyuan suddenly clamped his hand around my wrist with such force that it felt as though he were about to crush my bones. His piercing black eyes bore into mine, filled with scrutiny and murderous intent. Black Wind Cliff is covered in snow year-round. Even birds cannot cross it, and not even the most seasoned local guides dare to venture there. How could a woman like you, who's been sheltered away from the world, possibly know about that secret passage? Although my mother passed away young, she once accompanied my maternal grandfather on an inspection tour of the northern frontier and left behind a top-secret topographical map. I met his gaze without flinching, as the memories of my past life and the lies of this one intertwined seamlessly. Not even Nie Jingqiu has ever seen that map. I've known it by heart since I was 10. Every blade of grass, every tree, every ravine, and every gully in Meteor Valley is etched in my mind. If your Highness does not believe me, feel free to kill me right now, and then watch as 100,000 soldiers are buried alongside Nie Jingqiu. A deathly silence reigned in the cell, broken only by the crackling sound of the torches burning on the walls. After a moment, Qiuyin let go of my hand. Standing with his hands clasped behind his back, he looked down at me from above. The fierce killing intent that had surrounded him gradually subsided, replaced by the calculating mind of one in a position of imperial power. Go ahead, state your terms. Trading this classified information for the lives of the entire Nie family is far too lenient a deal for your good-for-nothing father. Your Highness, you've misunderstood. I never intended to save the Nie family. I rubbed my reddened wrist, my tone as cold as the ice and snow beyond the Great Wall. What I want is to sever all ties with Nie Jingqiu once and for all. If the Emperor wishes to execute him to vent his anger, he deserves it. But I am the one who averted the crisis at Guyu Pass, and that credit must be credited solely to me. Upon hearing this, a genuine flicker of surprise finally crossed Qiuyin's eyes. In the ancient world, with its strict Confucian ethics, such treasonous words would have been enough to warrant my death 100 times over. But he was no stuffy scholar. He was a demon who had crawled out from among the dead, and he understood better than anyone the concept of equivalent exchange. What do you want to do? He asked in a low voice. I am willing to sign a military pledge to personally lead those 2,000 light cavalry in a surprise attack on Blackwind Cliff. If I fail, I will present my head to the Emperor, and the entire Nie clan, 9 generations, shall be at the Emperor's mercy. I took a deep breath and revealed the ultimate goal I had been planning for a long time. If we win, I demand that your Majesty issue a formal imperial decree stripping Nie Jingqiu of his military authority. I shall follow in my mother's footsteps and take up the military token. From this day forward, I, Nie Jingqiu, shall be a general of the imperial court, and my life, death, honor, and disgrace shall have absolutely nothing to do with Nie Jingqiu. Qiuyin stared at me intently for a long time, so long that I almost thought he was going to refuse. But then he suddenly drew the sword at his waist and severed the high-grade iron shackles on my feet with a single stroke. In half an hour, I will take you to see His Majesty, Qiuyin said as he sheathed his sword, his voice ringing out clearly in the empty cell. My father values practicality above all else. As long as you can truly destroy the Beatty's supply camp, not only will he not disown you from the family, but he'll even grant you the title of general. What's the harm in that? The wind and snow outside the imperial prison had grown even fiercer than when I arrived. During that heart-stopping game of chess between the Emperor and his minister in the imperial study, I completely won over the Emperor, who sat high above, with my military simulations, which were precise to the utmost degree. The Emperor immediately bestowed upon me the gold medal symbolizing the commander of the vanguard and issued an oral decree: if this campaign is successful, the Nie family, father and daughter, shall be severed from the imperial grace, and their rewards shall be determined separately. The bugle call to battle sounded at dawn. I donned the set of silver-scaled soft armor my mother had left me. The moment I mounted my warhorse, I glanced back at the towering city walls of the capital. 2,000 light cavalrymen, like a sharp blade drawn from its sheath, pressed on day and night toward the northern frontier, using the wind and snow as cover. When we arrived at Blackwind Cliff, it was the dead of night, the time when the northern D army's defenses were at their weakest. The gale lashed our faces like knives. The cliff before us rose almost vertically from the ground, covered in a thick layer of solid ice. 2,000 elite soldiers lay hidden in the snow, holding their breath as much as possible, their eyes all fixed on me as they waited for this female general, who had arrived out of the blue, to issue her first military order. I drew the short dagger from my belt, thrust it forcefully into the ice before me, and used the momentum to climb upward, as shards of ice mixed with the cold wind swept up my neck. The wind blowing from the cliff's edge cut like a dull knife, slicing open the back of my hand. The blood froze into frost before it could even fall. By the time the last light cavalryman followed me over the top of Blackwind Cliff, the northern D supply camp, stretching 10 li below, lay fully exposed before our eyes. Lin Zhang, the commander of the elite cavalry of the Imperial Guard assigned to me by the Emperor, was breathing heavily as he peered down from behind a snowdrift. His eyes suddenly flashed with determination. General, the Northern D have indeed deployed their main forces to besiege Meteor Valley. There are fewer than 3,000 troops guarding the supply camp. I volunteered to lead 500 elite soldiers in an immediate assault on the camp. All it will take is a single fire. If you charge down there now, you won't even get close enough to touch the wheels of the supply wagons, you'll just get riddled with arrows like a hedgehog. I coldly pressed down on his hand as he reached for his sword, my voice remaining completely even amid the wind and snow. Lin Jing was taken aback, a look of confusion crossing his face. Take a good look at their defenses, I said, pointing to the felt tents below that lay in wait like giant black beasts. The Northern D people were born and raised in a harsh, frigid land. They know better than anyone how to protect themselves from wind and snow. They've stockpiled their provisions in a gourd-shaped mountain hollow sheltered from the wind, and their felt has been coated with a thick layer of moisture-resistant beef tallow. Even if you were to throw the torch in your hand up there, the wind and snow would extinguish it in less than half a moment. A direct assault would be like hitting a rock with an egg. In a past life, when my father, Nie Jingqiu, was trapped in Meteor Valley, he also sent a group of suicide soldiers to try to burn the grain supplies, but none of them survived. That good-for-nothing had no idea that this gourd-shaped mountain hollow, which seemed full of flaws, was actually a trap meticulously set by the commander of the Northern D. So what should we do? Lin Jing's tone finally shifted from one of disdain to one of gravity, and he instinctively lowered his voice. Wait, I said, gazing at the vast night sky and calculating the time. Wait for the right moment at the third quarter of the Z hour. The key to breaking a deadlock has never lain in reckless bravery, but in meticulous planning that leaves no stone unturned. In my previous life, I survived for a full half-month in this frozen wasteland by gnawing on tree bark, and at the cost of countless soldiers' lives, I learned a bloody lesson: the topography of Meteor Valley is extremely unique. Every deep winter night at the third quarter of the Z hour, an extremely fierce northwest wind is bound to surge back up the canyon, a phenomenon the locals call the backdraft. Time ticked by, second by second, in the dead silence. Just as the midnight hour struck its final blow in his heart, a deeply muffled howl suddenly echoed from the depths of the canyon, like the wailing of 10,000 ghosts in the night. The wind direction changed abruptly. Now's the time. I sprang to my feet, my eyes flashing with murderous intent. Fire the stone-throwing paint. Launch the rockets. 2,000 light cavalrymen, positioned high above, hurled the clay pots they had prepared in advance with all their might down toward the grain camp at the base of the cliff. Black, fiery oil, carried by the fierce wind, splashed precisely onto the felt cloths coated with beef tallow. Immediately afterward, a sky full of flaming arrows tore through the bitterly cold night like a deadly meteor shower. The fierce wind fueled the flames, and the flames fed the wind's fury. That gourd-shaped mountain hollow, originally meant to shelter against wind and snow, was instantly transformed into a massive crematorium by the frenzied surge of the updraft. The sky-high flames illuminated half the night sky as if it were day. From within the Northern D camp came piercing screams and the panicked whinnies of war horses. The thick layer of ox tallow became the most terrifying harbinger of death. Wherever the flames touched, not a blade of grass remained. I gazed coldly down at the inferno below, drew a specially crafted fine steel arrow from beside my saddle with a backhand motion, knocked it onto my bow, and aimed in the direction of Meteor Valley. Whoosh! A piercing shriek cut through the din of the battlefield and soared straight into the sky. This was the highest-level military signal of the Great Liang. The 100,000-strong army, trapped in Meteor Valley and on the brink of despair, could see, as long as they weren't blind, this flame that symbolized hope and a counterattack. The northern barbarians' morale has collapsed, and their supplies have been completely destroyed. The frontline troops will surely be retreating to reinforce our defenses. I swung myself onto my horse, drew the long sword from my waist, and pointed the blade directly at the remnants of the enemy below the mountain. Pass on my orders, block the mouth of the valley, leave no survivors, follow me into battle. There was no suspense whatsoever in this battle. Deprived of supplies and caught between two enemy forces, the Northern D army suffered a complete rout amid utter panic. As I rode my warhorse into Meteor Valley, trampling over scorched earth and the corpses of enemy soldiers, I came face to face with the remnants of the Nie family's army, who had just broken through the enemy encirclement. The deputy commander at the head of the troops was covered in blood. The moment he recognized my face, he looked as if he'd seen a ghost, and the spear in his hand clattered to the ground. "Miss? How could it be you?" Where's the commander? Where are the imperial reinforcements? No commander, and no other reinforcements. Looking down from my vantage point at this general who had once obeyed my father's every command, I slowly pulled from my bosom the imperial gold medal, stained with snow, ice, and gunpowder, and held it high. In the glow of the flames, the gold medal reflected the cold and majestic radiance of imperial power. Nie Jingqiu, in his greed for glory and reckless ambition, has brought defeat to our army and dishonor to our nation. He has been imprisoned and is awaiting the emperor's judgment. Starting tonight, I, Nie Jingqiu, will assume full command of the military forces along the northern border of Daliang. I scanned the crowd, taking in the looks of shock, bewilderment, and awe in their eyes, my voice echoing throughout the valley. The day the news of victory reached the capital, barely more than a month had passed since the narrow escape from the fall of Guyu Pass. I did not linger in the northern frontier to cling to military power. After securing the defensive lines and properly tending to the wounded, I rode through the night with the head of the Northern D commander, heading straight for the palace gates. In the imperial study, as the emperor gazed upon the head of the Northern D commander, preserved in lime, the last trace of doubt in his eyes finally vanished. This monarch, renowned for his iron fist, kept his word and immediately issued an imperial edict on yellow silk, not only conferring upon me the title of General of the Northern Frontier, second rank, but also proclaiming to the realm that I was permitted to sever ties with the house of the Marquis of Cheng'an and establish my own household. From this day forward, I, Nie Jingqiu, am the head of my own clan, and the heinous crimes committed by Nie Jingqiu can no longer be attributed to me. Hu Qiyuan followed me out of the grand hall. As we stepped down the white jade stairs, he turned his head to glance at me, his lowered voice carrying a hint of barely perceptible scrutiny. That move, cutting off the supply at the source, was truly masterful. You even drew your own biological father into your scheme. Aren't you afraid the whole world will point fingers at you? Your Highness, you are mistaken, I said, stopping in my tracks and meeting his gaze calmly. It was Nie Jingqiu who, driven by greed for glory, acted rashly first, and Su Jingxing who fanned the flames afterward. I am merely a dutiful daughter who was forced to hand over my mother's mementos and risk my life to atone for my father's sins. The people of the realm will only praise me for putting the greater good before family ties. Who would dare to speak ill of me behind my back? Hu Qiyuan paused for a moment, then let out a low, soft chuckle. The smile didn't reach his eyes, but it conveyed a hint of admiration for a worthy opponent. What a fine example of sacrificing family for the greater good. Everything has already been arranged at the imperial prison. Go see them one last time. By noon tomorrow, this play will have come to a complete end. As I stepped back into the imperial prison, the stench of stale blood still hung thick in the air, but this time, the guards bowed respectfully upon seeing me, addressing me as General Nie. Xiao Changfeng personally unlocked the cell for me, the one deep within the maximum security wing. The clatter of chains dragging across the floor startled several figures huddled in the corner. In just 1 month, Nie Jingqiu, once so arrogant and invincible, had turned completely gray and looked as withered as a dried-up tree. And the disheveled young man in prison garb standing beside him was none other than Su Jingxing, who had once sworn to grant me a lifetime of splendor. As for my dear younger sister, Nie Yurua, she was now huddled in Su Jingxing's arms, trembling uncontrollably. Jingqiu! As soon as Nie Jingqiu recognized me, his cloudy eyes suddenly lit up with wild joy, and he scrambled and crawled his way to the iron bars. It's you! Did you plead with the Emperor for mercy? I knew it, with the blood of the Nie family running through your veins, you'd never stand by and watch someone die. Looking down on him from my vantage point as he stood there in such a humble posture, I slowly drew the bright yellow imperial edict from my sleeve and unfolded it without a trace of emotion. By the mandate of heaven, the emperor decrees, Nie Jingqiu, formerly the Marquis of Cheng'an, was arrogant and obsessed with glory, thereby jeopardizing the opportunity for victory. His crime is unforgivable. He is hereby stripped of his title and shall be escorted to the market square at noon tomorrow to be beheaded immediately. His daughter, Nie Jingqiu, has distinguished herself in military command. She is hereby specially conferred the title of General of the Northern Frontier, granted a residence, and permitted to establish her own household, thereby severing all ties with the guilty subject Nie Jingqiu from this day forward. Every word felt like a heavy blow, striking the hearts of the 3 people in the cell. The wild joy on Nie Jingqiu's face froze in an instant, turning to utter disbelief and horror. He pointed at me with a trembling finger. You've cut ties with the family? You trampled on my own flesh and blood to secure your own wealth and glory? Father, your words are nothing short of ridiculous. I tucked away the imperial edict, my gaze as cold as ice. When you disregarded the terrain and forced a formation at Guiwei Pass, leading to the bones of 100,000 soldiers lying exposed in the wilderness, did you ever give a thought to the fate of the great Liang Empire? The honor I hold today was earned through a brush with death on Blackwind Cliff. What business is it of yours? It was you. You set this up from the very beginning. Su Jingqiu suddenly lunged at me like a madman, his hands clenched tightly around the iron bars, his eyes bloodshot as he glared at me, his voice filled with utter fear and despair. You knew all along that the formation at Guiwei Pass was a death trap. You deliberately brought it up with me at the water pavilion, deliberately lured me into trying to persuade my uncle. Nie Jingqiu, you venomous woman, you even manipulated me into this. Prince Su, you can eat whatever you like, but you can't just say whatever comes to mind. I leaned forward slightly, looking at his face contorted with remorse, my voice gentle yet every word cutting to the bone. You took that formation diagram from my courtyard with your own hands, and you were the ones who sought to claim the military merits for yourselves. I merely handed you a knife. It was you who, unable to wait, used it to slit your own throats. Su Jingqiu felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. All his strength seemed to drain from him in an instant, and he slumped down onto the pile of dry grass. He finally realized that his so-called clever strategy of playing it safe and cutting off his retreat, which he thought was a shrewd move, had been nothing more than a sacrificial pawn on my chessboard of revenge from the very beginning. I straightened up, no longer watching the collapse and wails of this group of doomed men, and turned to walk toward the prison gate, leaving behind only the cold, hard echo of my boots striking the blue stone slabs, step by step crushing their last glimmer of hope. At 3/4 noon at the West Market execution ground, the crowd was so dense that even the bare trees in the surrounding area were packed with onlookers. I had taken off the imperial court robes bestowed upon me and was now draped in a plain brocade cloak, standing quietly in a private booth at the tea house directly across from the execution platform. In my past life, I too stood in this blinding sunlight as a wooden collar weighing 30 Jin was roughly forced onto me, listening to Su Jingqiu stand on the execution platform and solemnly read out the fabricated evidence accusing me of colluding with the enemy and treason. Now, the roles have been completely reversed. By the time Nie Jingqiu and Su Jingqiu were forced onto the prison cart, they were already bloodied and bruised from the rotten vegetable leaves and sharp stones hurled at them by the crowds lining the streets. With 100,000 soldiers buried in foreign lands and Guiwei Pass nearly lost, every household in the capital was in mourning. This overwhelming public outrage was enough to tear them to pieces. Nie Jingqiu wasn't even eligible to stand on this execution platform. As the daughter of a traitor, she had been sentenced under the laws of the Great Liang dynasty to be consigned to the Imperial Music Bureau. At that moment, she was being dragged by 2 burly, muscular female attendants toward another black-canopied prison wagon. Sister Jingqiu. I was wrong. Please, for the sake of our sisterly bond, save me. Nie Jingqiu's sharp eyes spotted me on the second floor of the tea house above the crowd, and she cried out hoarsely, a far cry from her usual pitiful, sheezy clutching her heart demeanor. I lowered my gaze with an indifferent expression and picked up a cup of hot tea from the table. At 3/4 noon, the death-announcing gong suddenly rang out. The executioner slammed the vermilion fire token in his hand down hard onto the blue-gray brick, producing a crisp, muffled thud. Execute. Su Jingqiu knelt on the execution platform. As if sensing something, he suddenly raised his head, and his desperate gaze swept past the seething crowd, fixing intently on me. That look was filled with endless regret and fear. I met his gaze, turned my wrist slightly, and poured the warm tea out the window. Let this cup of tea serve as a tribute to Nie Jingqiu of a past life, a man who was blind in both sight and heart and met a tragic end. With a swift swing of the executioner's blade, 2 streams of crimson blood instantly splattered across the snow-covered wooden platform. A deafening roar of cheers erupted from the crowd, while the commoners who had lost their sons knelt on the ground, wailing bitterly toward the north and bowing their heads repeatedly. As the two severed heads rolled to the ground, the tension that had gripped my heart across 2 lifetimes suddenly gave way to a soft sigh of relief. The bone-chilling cold of my past life, the heart-wrenching betrayal, and the brutal beatings in the imperial prison, all were reduced to dust in that moment, along with the dirt covering the ground. I finally came back to life, completely clean. To see such a bloody scene and not even bat an eye, that truly makes me look at you in a new light, General. A deep voice, tinged with a hint of amusement, sounded from behind him. Jingqiu pushed open the door and walked in. I didn't know when he'd arrived. He wasn't wearing his princely robe with the python pattern, but instead a simple, understated robe with a cloud and water pattern. He casually draped a thick fox fur cloak over my shoulders. It's just a matter of killing a few mad dogs that have turned on their masters. What's there to fear? I didn't turn around. My gaze swept past the chaotic execution ground toward the layered palace complexes in the distance. Besides, rooting out the problem is only the first step. Though the northern D have retreated to the grasslands, the border troubles remain unresolved. Though the crown prince has been deposed due to factional strife, the court is still unstable. Your Highness has come to see me in disguise at this hour. Surely it isn't just to watch a beheading with me? Jingqiu walked over to my side and stood shoulder to shoulder with me. His deep gaze rested on my face, no longer the condescending scrutiny of our first meeting, but the solemn regard one might show a fellow hunter. The emperor is growing old, and the other princes are growing restless. I need the unwavering support of the 100,000-strong cavalry of the northern frontier. He didn't beat around the bush. Placing a piece of warm jade engraved with his private seal on the table, he spoke in a calm tone that concealed a thunderous warning. Though the commander-in-chief's seal of the northern frontier is in your hands, to fully subdue those arrogant and fierce soldiers and ensure an uninterrupted supply of provisions, you still need someone within the court to manipulate the political winds on your behalf. You fight the enemy on the front lines. I will stabilize the situation for you from the rear. I'll defend the northern frontier for your Highness and serve as your sharpest sword in the struggle for the throne. As my fingertips traced the smooth jade token, a faint smile finally curled at the corners of my lips, the clear-eyed resolve of one destined for power. And what can your Highness offer me in return? In the 100 years since the founding of the Great Liang dynasty, there has never been a precedent for a female general being granted the title of marquis. Jingqiu turned around, looked me straight in the eye, and, enunciating each word carefully, offered his most valuable bargaining chip. Once this prince ascends the throne, you, Nie Jingqiu, will be the one to write the very first stroke on the iron-sealed, crimson-inked charter conferring the title of the Great Liang's first female marquis. What do you say? No hypocritical vows of eternal love, no pointless romantic trinkets, just a raw yet indestructible alliance of mutual interest. I tucked the jade token into my sleeve, turned to meet his gaze, and said with candor and resolve, it's a deal. I hope your Highness's skills in the imperial court are a match for the spear in my hand. The wind and snow outside had completely stopped, and the warm early spring sun broke through the thick clouds, pouring down upon the capital's endless rows of glazed tiles. 3 days later, clad in silver-scaled armor and mounted on a snow-white warhorse, I led 2,000 personal guards back to the northern frontier, with the entire city lining the streets to see us off in awe and reverence. Su Jingxing's remains lay outside the city in a mass grave, being devoured by stray dogs. Nie Jingqiu endured torments worse than death within the Bureau of Music. And I would ride my horse across the vast mountains and rivers of Dalian to carve out a legendary empire that would belong solely to me, Nie Jingqiu. That's the end of the story. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment. Thank you.